In the glittering, humid expanse of Houston, Texas, the name Victoria Sterling was synonymous with success. Her company, Sterling Innovations, a tech firm she had built from the ground up, occupied the top 5 floors of a gleaming skyscraper in the Galleria district. She was a multimillionaire CEO, a force of nature in a bespoke suit, her ambition as sharp and relentless as the Texas sun. Her life was a carefully curated masterpiece of power, wealth, and influence. At the center of this masterpiece was her husband, Henry. To the outside world, they were the ultimate power couple. Henry was a senior partner at a prestigious downtown law firm, a man of quiet dignity and conservative values. He was the steady, grounding force to Victoria's whirlwind of ambition. Their life in a sprawling River Oaks mansion, with its manicured lawns and silent, efficient staff, was the picture of modern royalty. They had everything a couple could dream of, except for the one thing that mattered: each other. The distance between them hadn't started as a chasm, but as a series of small, imperceptible cracks. It was the dinners eaten in silence, the conversations that skimmed the surface of their lives, the way they moved around each other like polite, well-dressed strangers. Henry found solace in the structured logic of the law, in the quiet comfort of his study, surrounded by leather-bound books. Victoria, however, craved something more. She craved the fire, the passion, the validation that her sterile, perfect life no longer provided. And then Jamal walked into her life. He was her new executive assistant, a position most would consider a secretarial role. But Jamal was anything but ordinary. He was a vibrant splash of color in her monochrome world. Flamboyant, witty, and impossibly charming, he moved with a dancer's grace, his clothes a bold statement of confidence, his laughter a melody that echoed through the sterile halls of her office. He wasn't just an assistant. He was an event. He anticipated her needs before she voiced them. A perfectly brewed cup of coffee on her desk after a tense meeting. A compliment on her dress that was both respectful and deeply personal. He listened, not just to her words, but to the exhaustion and loneliness behind them. He saw the woman, not just the CEO. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world today, Miss Sterling," he said one evening, his voice a soft murmur as he found her staring out at the city lights. Her shoulders slumped with fatigue. "It comes with the job, Jamal," she sighed. "Let me help you carry it for a while," he said, his smile gentle, his eyes holding a warmth she hadn't felt in years. "That's what I'm here for." It started with that, a shared glance, a lingering touch as he handed her a file, late nights at the office that felt less like work and more like a secret rendezvous. Victoria, the powerful CEO who commanded boardrooms and crushed competitors, found herself utterly defenseless against the simple, intoxicating power of being seen. The cracks in her perfect life were widening, and she was willingly, eagerly leaning into the fall. She had no idea that Jamal was not a savior, but a saboteur, and the fall would be far more devastating than she could ever imagine. The affair was a wildfire, consuming the dry, neglected landscape of Victoria's heart. It was a whirlwind of stolen moments, each one more reckless and intoxicating than the last. It was hushed conversations in the back of her chauffeured car, clandestine lunches at discreet restaurants in Montrose, and passionate, desperate encounters in the cold, impersonal luxury of 5-star hotel suites. With Jamal, Victoria felt like a teenager again, alive with a dangerous, exhilarating freedom. He showered her with the kind of effusive, poetic adoration that Henry, in his quiet stoicism, had never been able to provide. "You're a goddess, Victoria," Jamal would whisper, his fingers tracing the lines of her face. "A queen trapped in a castle. You deserve to be worshipped." And Victoria, starved for that worship, believed him. She began to see her life with Henry not as a partnership, but as a prison. Henry's quiet stability now felt like suffocating boredom. His conservative nature felt like a judgment on her own desires. She was the CEO, the multimillionaire, the one with all the power. Yet with Jamal, she felt a thrilling sense of submission, a release from the constant pressure of being in control. It wasn't long before the worship required tribute. It started subtly. Jamal's laptop died right before a major presentation. Victoria, without a second thought, bought him the latest, most expensive model. Then his car broke down. She leased him a brand new luxury sedan, telling herself it was a necessary expense for her top assistant. Each gift was met with a fresh wave of adoration, a more intense display of passion, reinforcing the toxic cycle. What Victoria never saw were the secret, late-night phone calls Jamal would make after leaving her arms. He wouldn't call a woman. He would call a man named Marco, his long-term boyfriend, who was living in a small, cramped apartment on the other side of town. "Patience, baby. Just a little more patience," Jamal would murmur into the phone, his voice stripped of the flamboyant charm he used with Victoria, replaced by a cold, focused ambition. He stood on the balcony of his new, Victoria-funded high-rise apartment, looking out at the city. "I saw the watch you wanted today. The Patek Philippe. It's almost yours. Our life is almost here. I just need to keep the old dragon happy. She's completely hooked." Marco's voice on the other end was a mixture of greed and impatience. "Just hurry up, Jamal. I'm tired of waiting. I want the life you promised me." "And you'll have it," Jamal promised, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "She's a lonely, foolish woman with a very, very deep bank account. We're going to bleed her dry. And she'll thank me for it." He ended the call and turned back to the opulent apartment, a palace built on lies. He looked at his reflection in the glass, the charming, devoted assistant, the passionate lover. It was a role he played to perfection. He was an actor, and Victoria Sterling was his adoring, unsuspecting audience. The stage was set for a tragedy, and he was directing every single scene.
If you're enjoying this story, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notifications so you don't miss the next episode.
As the affair intensified, so did Jamal's manufactured crises. His sick mother in another state needed money for experimental surgery. A once-in-a-lifetime real estate investment opportunity fell into his lap, requiring a significant down payment. Each request was a performance, complete with tears, desperation, and promises of eternal gratitude. Victoria, blinded by what she believed was love, opened her accounts without question. She transferred hundreds of thousands of dollars, feeling a sense of power and purpose in being his savior, his provider. She was the queen, and he was her devoted subject, and this was how she showed her favor. The changes in Victoria were not lost on Henry. The emotional distance between them had become a frozen tundra. She was constantly on her phone, smiling at texts she would quickly hide if he entered the room. She was late for dinners, claiming work emergencies with a frequency that was becoming alarming. The warmth had vanished from their home, replaced by a brittle, polite tension. Henry felt a deep, gnawing unease, a sense that the foundations of his life were shifting beneath his feet, but he couldn't pinpoint the source of the tremor. The warning came from an unexpected source. Carol, Victoria's executive administrator for over a decade, was a woman of quiet efficiency and fierce loyalty. She had been there since the beginning, had watched Victoria build her empire, and she had a deep, abiding respect for Henry. She had seen the change in her boss, and she had seen the cause, Jamal. She saw his expensive new clothes, his luxury car, the way he looked at Victoria with a possessive familiarity that made her skin crawl. She saw the way Victoria's eyes followed him, a look of desperate infatuation that was both pathetic and dangerous. After weeks of wrestling with her conscience, Carol made a decision. She couldn't watch the company, and the woman she had once admired, be destroyed by a predator. She arranged to have a chance encounter with Henry at a coffee shop near his law firm. "Henry, it's so good to see you," she began, her smile warm but her eyes serious. "Carol, likewise. "How are things at the office?" he asked, his voice polite, professional. Carol took a deep breath. "Henry, I don't want to overstep, but I'm worried about Victoria. She's not herself lately. She seems distracted. And that new assistant, Jamal, he has a lot of influence over her, more than is appropriate. She chose her words carefully, planting a seed of doubt rather than making a direct accusation. He's very flamboyant and very ambitious. Just be careful. Pay attention." The conversation was brief, but it was a bombshell. Henry thanked her, his face an unreadable mask, but inside, his mind was racing. Carol was not a gossip. She was a loyal, level-headed professional. For her to say something meant it was serious. The vague unease he had been feeling now had a name: Jamal. That night, as Victoria slept, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Henry's heart pounded in his chest. He picked it up. The screen lit up with a new message. It was from Jay. The message read, "Thinking of you, my queen. Can't wait to feel your arms around me again." Henry stared at the screen, the words blurring through a haze of shock and pain. It wasn't just a tremor anymore. It was an earthquake. And in that moment, he knew, with a sickening certainty, that his perfect life was a lie. The bug had been planted, and now the poison was spreading through his veins. 2 weeks later, Victoria delivered the news that should have been a joyous celebration, but instead felt like another layer of deception. She was pregnant. She told Henry over a tense, silent dinner, her eyes avoiding his, her hand resting almost defensively on her stomach. "I'm pregnant, Henry," she said, her voice flat, as if announcing a quarterly earnings report. A year ago, this news would have sent Henry into a state of pure elation. They had tried for years, a painful journey of doctors and disappointments that had only added to the distance between them. Now, the words landed like stones in the pit of his stomach. He looked at his wife, at the woman who was texting another man about being in his arms, and he had to force a smile. That's wonderful news, Victoria," he said, his voice hollow. He wanted to believe it. He wanted, with every fiber of his being, to believe that this child could be the bridge to close the chasm between them, to repair the shattered fragments of their marriage. But Carol's warning and the memory of that late-night text echoed in his mind, a chorus of doubt that drowned out any hope. The pregnancy became a shield for Victoria. Her moods, her secrecy, her constant fatigue, it was all attributed to the baby. Henry, playing the part of the devoted husband, catered to her every need, his heart a cold, heavy knot in his chest. He was no longer just a husband. He was an investigator in his own home, a silent observer, gathering evidence of his own betrayal. He started to notice everything. The way Victoria's face would light up when a text came through, a light he hadn't seen directed at him in years. The hushed, hurried phone call she would take in another room. He saw the credit card statements, filled with extravagant purchases from high-end boutiques, purchases he knew weren't for her. A man's Rolex, a tailored suit from a menswear designer. He cross-referenced the dates with her calendar. They were all on days she had late meetings with Jamal. The pain was a constant physical ache. He would watch her sleep, this beautiful stranger in his bed, and wonder who she was. Where was the woman he had married? The woman who had once looked at him with love and respect? He felt a profound, soul-crushing heartbreak, the kind that comes from a betrayal so deep it rewrites your entire history. But beneath the heartbreak, something else was growing. A cold, hard resolve. He was a lawyer. He dealt in facts, in evidence, in the methodical pursuit of truth. He would not be a victim. He would not be a fool. He would play the long game. He continued to play the part of the doting, expectant father. He went with her to doctor's appointments, listened to the baby's heartbeat, and felt a pang of sorrow for the child who was being born into a web of lies. He decorated the nursery, assembled the crib, and smiled for the family photos. His face, a perfect mask of happiness. He was gathering his evidence, building his case. He documented every suspicious charge, every late-night text, every whispered phone call. He was a man preparing for war, sharpening his weapons in silence, waiting for the right moment to strike. The love he once had for his wife was slowly, painfully, being replaced by a desire for something else. Justice. Or perhaps it was something darker. Perhaps it was revenge. The birth of their son, whom they named Ethan, was not the joyous occasion it should have been. For Henry, it was the beginning of the final, agonizing chapter of his torment. He held the tiny, fragile baby in his arms, looking for any trace of himself in the infant's features. He searched for his own eyes, his father's nose, any familiar family trait. He found none. Instead, as the weeks turned into months, he saw a ghost. He saw the subtle curve of Jamal's smile, the shape of his eyes, the shade of his skin. Every time he looked at the child, he saw the face of his wife's betrayal. The love he should have felt for his son was choked by a constant, suffocating wave of doubt and resentment. He went through the motions of fatherhood, changing diapers, feeding, and rocking the baby to sleep, but his heart was a block of ice. He was a stranger to this child, and the child was a living, breathing monument to his humiliation. Victoria, meanwhile, was lost in her own world. She was consumed by the affair, her maternal instincts dulled by her obsession with Jamal. She was often distracted, irritable, leaving the bulk of the childcare to Henry and the nanny. She saw Ethan's resemblance to Jamal as a secret, thrilling bond between her and her lover, a private joke at her husband's expense. She had no idea that for Henry, it was a daily torture. The breaking point came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Henry was in the nursery, watching Ethan sleep in his crib. The baby's face, so peaceful in slumber, was a perfect miniature version of Jamal's. The resemblance was undeniable, a cruel mockery of Henry's entire life. He couldn't live like this anymore. The not knowing was a cancer, eating him alive from the inside out. With a trembling hand, he reached into the crib and gently plucked a single, tiny hair from the baby's head. He then went into his own bathroom and pulled a hair from his brush. He placed them in separate, labeled plastic bags. His movements precise and methodical, like a scientist collecting specimens for a cold, hard experiment. His heart felt like it was going to beat out of his chest, but his hands were steady. The lawyer in him had taken over. He found a reputable DNA testing lab online, one that guaranteed confidentiality. He filled out the forms, paid the fee, and sent the samples off via courier. His secret, a ticking time bomb, in a small, anonymous package. Then, the waiting began. It was the longest 2 weeks of his life. Every day was a fresh hell, a tightrope walk between a sliver of desperate hope and a mountain of crushing certainty. He continued to play the part of the loving husband and father, his performance so convincing that Victoria remained blissfully, arrogantly oblivious. The email arrived on a Friday morning. The subject line was simple: "Your paternity test results are ready." Henry's hands shook as he clicked the link and entered his case number. The page loaded, a PDF document appearing on his screen. He scrolled down past the technical jargon, his eyes searching for the one sentence that would define the rest of his life. And there it was, in cold, black, irrefutable text: probability of paternity, 0%. The screen blurred. The air was sucked from his lungs. The world tilted on its axis. It was not a shock, not really. It was a confirmation of every doubt, every fear, every sleepless night. The pain was immense, a physical blow that left him breathless. But as the initial wave of heartbreak receded, it was replaced by something else, a chilling, terrifying calm. The kind of calm that comes when all hope is lost, and all that is left is the cold, hard clarity of rage. The fool was dead. The husband was dead. In his place, a judge and executioner was born.
If you're enjoying this story, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notifications so you don't miss the next episode.
Henry did not confront Victoria. Not yet. The 0% on the screen had not just broken his heart, it had rewired his soul. The grief was still there, a cold, heavy stone in his chest, but it was now encased in a layer of ice-cold fury. A confrontation would be emotional, messy. It would give her the chance to lie, to cry, to manipulate. He didn't want tears. He wanted consequences. He wanted ruin. He was a lawyer. He knew that victory was not won by shouting, but by evidence. He had the truth about the child. Now, he needed the truth about everything else. He needed to understand the full scope of the betrayal, the depth of the deception. He needed to know his enemy. The next day, he contacted a private investigator, the best and most discreet in Houston. A man named Franklin, a former FBI agent with a reputation for unearthing secrets that powerful people paid millions to keep buried. Henry met him in a sterile, anonymous office, far from his own world of polished mahogany and skyline views. "I need to know everything," Henry said, his voice devoid of emotion. "My wife, Victoria Sterling, and her assistant, a man named Jamal. I want their lives for the past year documented. Every meeting, every phone call, every financial transaction. I want to know where the money is going. I want to know who he is. I want to know everything. Spare no expense." Franklin nodded, his eyes sharp and assessing. He had seen men like Henry before, powerful men brought to their knees by betrayal. He knew this wasn't just about a divorce case. This was about annihilation. For the next month, Henry lived a double life. By day, he was the devoted husband, the doting father to a child that was not his. He smiled, he cooed, he played the part to perfection. By night, he was a general, poring over the daily reports from Franklin, each one a fresh stab to his already bleeding heart. The reports were devastatingly thorough. There were the photos. Victoria and Jamal kissing passionately in the back of her car, their bodies tangled together in a hotel room, laughing over champagne at a secluded restaurant. There were the financial records, a torrent of money flowing from Victoria's personal and business accounts into Jamal's, hundreds of thousands of dollars, a down payment on a luxury condo, a new Mercedes, a series of wire transfers to an unknown account. And then, Franklin delivered the final, crushing blow, the double betrayal. "We followed the wire transfers, Mr. Sterling," Franklin said, his voice grim as he slid a new folder across the table. "They lead to an account belonging to a man named Marco Reyes. And Mr. Reyes, well, he's more than just an account holder." Henry opened the folder. Inside were photos of Jamal and another man, a handsome, well-dressed man. They were holding hands, walking into a high-end apartment building, the same building Jamal had told Victoria he was investing in. There were photos of them kissing on a balcony, their arms wrapped around each other. There were photos of them on vacation in Mexico, laughing on a beach, a trip paid for by Victoria's money. Jamal, the flamboyant, charming lover, had a boyfriend he was funding by bleeding Henry's wife dry. Henry stared at the photos, a bitter, mirthless laugh escaping his lips. It was so much worse than he had imagined, so much more sordid. Victoria wasn't just a cheater. She was a fool, a mark, a lonely, wealthy woman being played by a con artist. The heartbreak he had felt was now eclipsed by a profound, searing contempt. He felt nothing for her anymore. No love, no pity, just a cold, empty void. He closed the folder. He had it all: the DNA test, the photos of the affair, the financial records, and the final, beautiful, damning proof of the double cross. He had the motive, the means, and the evidence. The case was closed. Now, it was time for the sentencing. The day of reckoning was a carefully orchestrated masterpiece of psychological warfare. Henry chose the setting with deliberate cruelty. Their anniversary. Their 15th anniversary. He had spent weeks planning the evening, feigning a renewed sense of commitment, telling Victoria he wanted to celebrate, to try and find their way back to each other. Victoria, arrogant and oblivious, had been delighted. She saw it as a sign that her clueless husband was finally accepting his place in her new world. Henry booked a private dining room at Tony's, one of Houston's most exclusive and expensive restaurants. It was a place of power, a place where deals were made and reputations were cemented. It was the perfect stage for the final act of their marriage. He arrived first, calm and composed in a perfectly tailored suit. He handed the maitre d' a thick manila envelope. "Please give this to my wife when she arrives," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "and please ensure we are not disturbed." Victoria arrived a few minutes later, a vision in a stunning designer dress, a smug, self-satisfied smile on her face. The maitre d' handed her the envelope. Puzzled, she opened it. Inside, she found a single document. It was the DNA test result. Her eyes scanned the page, her brain struggling to comprehend the words. And then she saw it. Probability of paternity, 0%. The color drained from her face. The smug smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated panic. She stumbled into the private dining room, the document clutched in her trembling hand. Henry was standing by the window, looking out at the city lights, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable, his eyes as cold and hard as diamonds. "Happy anniversary, my love," he said, his voice dripping with a venomous irony. "Henry, what is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "That," he said, taking a slow sip of his whiskey, "is the truth, a concept with which you seem to be unfamiliar." He let the silence hang in the air, a suffocating blanket of guilt and fear. He watched her crumble, her carefully constructed world shattering around her. And then he began to lay out his case, piece by damning piece. "I know about Jamal, Victoria," he said, his voice a low, dangerous monotone. "I know about the late nights, the hotel rooms, the secret lunches. I know about the money. The $50,000 for his mother's surgery. The $150,000 for his real estate investment. The new car. The Rolex. I know it all." Victoria's eyes widened in horror. She opened her mouth to speak, to lie, to deny, but he cut her off. "Don't," he said, his voice sharp as a razor. "Don't you dare lie to me. Not anymore." He walked over to the table and placed a second envelope on the polished wood. "But you see, Victoria, you weren't just a cheater. You were a fool. And that, I think, is the most pathetic part of all." With a shaking hand, she opened the second envelope. Inside were the photos. The photos of Jamal and Marco, kissing, holding hands, living their best life on her dime. The double betrayal hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back, a strangled sob escaping her lips. She had been played, used, humiliated. Not just by her lover, but by the man she had betrayed her husband for. "He was using you, Victoria," Henry said, his voice devoid of any pity. "He was using you for your money, to fund a life with his real partner. And you, the brilliant, powerful CEO, you fell for it. You gave him everything. You even gave him a child." He let that final, brutal truth land. He watched as the full weight of her ruin crashed down upon her. The affair, the baby, the money, the lies. It was all for nothing. She had sacrificed her marriage, her family, her dignity, for a man who was laughing at her behind her back. "So, what now, Henry?" she whispered, her voice broken. Henry finished his whiskey and placed the glass down with a soft click. Now, you will do exactly as I say, or I will release every single one of these documents to the board of your company, to the media, and to the SEC. I will destroy you. I will take your company, your reputation, and your son. You will have nothing. Am I clear? Victoria stared at the man in front of her. This was not the quiet, conservative husband she had taken for granted. This was a stranger, a cold, ruthless man who was about to burn her world to the ground. And she knew, with a chilling certainty, that she had no choice but to watch it burn. The aftermath was a slow, methodical execution. Henry, with the cold precision of a master litigator, dismantled Victoria's life, piece by painful piece. He didn't file for divorce immediately. That would have been too quick, too merciful. Instead, he trapped her in their cold, silent mansion, a prisoner in her own gilded cage, while he systematically took everything she held dear. First, he went after her company. Armed with the evidence of her massive, unauthorized transfers of company funds to Jamal, Henry called a secret, emergency meeting with the board of directors of Sterling Innovations. He laid out the evidence of Victoria's embezzlement, her gross negligence, her reckless affair that had put the entire company at risk. The board, horrified and facing a massive scandal, had no choice. Victoria was unceremoniously fired from the company she had built, forced to resign in disgrace, her legacy shattered overnight. Next, he went after her son. He filed for sole custody of Ethan, using the DNA test and the evidence of her affair and financial recklessness to paint her as an unfit, unstable mother. The court battle was brutal and swift. Victoria, stripped of her company and her reputation, had no resources to fight back. The judge awarded full custody to Henry, the stable, devoted father who had been so cruelly deceived. Victoria was granted limited, supervised visitation, a twice-a-month reminder of the son she had lost. Finally, he went after her freedom. He gave her an ultimatum. She could sign a divorce settlement that left her with absolutely nothing, no money, no assets, no claim to his fortune, or he would press criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud. Broken and defeated, she signed. In the span of a few short months, Victoria Sterling, the multimillionaire CEO, the Houston power player, was left with nothing but a mountain of legal bills and the ashes of her former life. But Henry's revenge was not complete. He still had one loose end to tie up: Jamal. Henry had no interest in suing him. He wanted something more personal, more poetic. He used the information from the private investigator to find Marco, Jamal's boyfriend. He sent Marco a simple, anonymous package. Inside was a copy of the DNA test and a single photo of Victoria, beautiful, powerful, and very, very pregnant. The package was a bomb, and it detonated perfectly. Marco, realizing he was just one part of Jamal's long con, that Jamal had not only been sleeping with a woman but had fathered a child with her, was enraged. Their world of stolen luxury imploded in a firestorm of accusations and violence. Jamal, the master manipulator, found himself on the receiving end of a betrayal he never saw coming. Marco cleaned out their shared accounts, took the expensive gifts, and disappeared, but not before leaking Jamal's sordid story to the press. Jamal, exposed as a con artist and a fraud, was fired from his new job, blacklisted from every executive circle in the city, and left with nothing. The ending for Victoria and Jamal was a quiet, pathetic tragedy. Victoria, stripped of her power and wealth, moved into a small, rented apartment, a ghost haunting the edges of the city she once ruled. She was a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. Jamal, his charm and good looks failing him, fell into a spiral of debt and despair, his dreams of a lavish life turning to dust. Henry, on the other hand, thrived. He had won. He had his justice. He had his revenge. He sold the River Oaks mansion, a place now tainted by memories of betrayal, and moved with his son, the son who was not his by blood, but who was now his by law and by heart, into a new home. He found, to his surprise, that the cold rage that had fueled him for so long had been replaced by a fierce, protective love for the innocent child caught in the crossfire. He would raise Ethan as his own, give him the stable, loving home he deserved, and erase the sins of his parents. One evening, months later, Henry was reading a bedtime story to Ethan. The child looked up at him, his eyes wide and trusting, and said, "I love you, Daddy." In that moment, Henry knew he had truly won. He had not just destroyed his enemies. He had built something new from the wreckage. A family. A future. He had lost a wife, but he had gained a son. And in the quiet peace of that love, he finally found his victory.
Before you go, tap that like button, leave a comment to let us know what you think, and subscribe so you're always the first to hear our next story. Your support keeps these stories coming.